My goodness, did I have rose-tinted contacts grafted to my eyeballs when I last saw this season? Before I start flipping tables and whipping bitches, if you enjoy what you hear in this video, then please, subscribe to help build this kingdom. Netflixvania Season 2 picks up immediately after the conclusion of Season 1. The demonic attack against Greshit has been stopped, and knowing the coming battle is going to be quite fierce, Trevor decides to bring Alucard and Ciiff to his old ancestral home to find any spells, equipment, anything of any kind that can help them claim victory. Parallel to this, Dracula and his forces try to gather their strength and maintain their upper momentum in this war. Dracula's two most trusted servants, Hector and Isaac, are forge masters, helping him to replenish his forces as the war continues. However, not all of the vampires are on board with everything, as they don't feel like they should be bossed around by humans, nor do they believe that Dracula's intentions of genocide are exactly what they want. As dissent within the War Council grows alongside their bloodthirst, it becomes a race against time as the heroic trio tries to find anything they can use against the vampires and ultimately assault Dracula's castle to bring an end to the war. There's far more to discuss about Season 2 than Season 1. Or rather, Part 2, because it doesn't feel like a Season 2. It still feels like a Part 2 because of how quickly this was announced after the success of the previous season. Sort of like how Nocturne Season 2 was announced basically the same day when Season 1 was released on Netflix. Except, as we all know, Nocturne was never actually popular, but I get ahead of myself. Back to the main point, Castlevania Part 2's art is noticeably weaker. A number of shortcuts are taken. Like I mentioned in the previous season Re-Revew, a lot of the animation has that really ugly mask layer separation crap like Chowder, or any other super cheap anime for that matter. There's also the occasional 3D object that's thrown in and actually breaks the immersion because nothing is unified, just like the key mechanism that controls the castle. And you can tell that a lot of the budget, if not most of the budget, was spent on the fights, including the finale. There are more vampires this time, because of that whole big war council that Dracula has, they decided to diversify it, which I'll get to at a later point, but if we're talking about just their designs and how they all look fine. It's like Dracula went to Disney World's Epcot and just picked up a bunch of mascots. The demons also see a bit of an upgrade. Not everything is the same imp demon vampire thing from before. No, they finally cracked open the extensive Pokédex from this franchise and pulled some of the more famous and recognizable designs like Slogra, Gaben, the Minotaur, even some of the bird and bat-type innocent devils from Curse of Darkness appear. Although I still don't understand why the Minotaur has vampire fangs. Regardless, they all look a lot better, even if their designs are a little too soft in some cases. However, sticking to the animation end, it's really hit and miss. A lot of the fights and motions are really slowed down right before it ramps up very quickly for an attack, and then characters just kind of fall over. A good example of this is Godbrand killing all the soldiers in his dream. Yes, dream, I'll get to that one in a moment. But there's just as many really stupid decisions where things just stand there and let themselves die, or get attacked for that matter. When Trevor is fighting the Minotaur in his family trove, it basically just stands there and tanks abuse. Or many of the vampires after the trio finally storms the castle. Or worse yet, all of the bandits on horseback just watch Isaac charge after them with a flail and a knife, and they just sit there and do nothing. And you'd think with all of the vast amounts of music in this franchise, almost all of which are absolute bangers, and almost nothing in the series is actually worth remembering. Almost all of the music just sounds like a bunch of war drums being beaten in unison. Seriously, none of it comes to mind. It's like listening to the Rings of Power soundtrack again. There's nothing of interest. There is one exception though, and that would be the orchestral rendition of Bloody Tears. Broken clock theory, what can I say? And without further ado, I want to get straight into the real main course of this series, which is the writing and characters, and my goodness, do they suck. A quick addendum for my re-review of Season 1, because I totally forgot to do this until it was too late, but fuck Warren Ellis for removing Grant from the series. Ellis hates Grant for two reasons. Because the area is a bit landlocked, he doesn't believe that pirates would ever dare travel that far inland, which is weird because I'm pretty sure they're just called bandits. And second, and most stupid of all, he hates his last name. Hey, dipshit Mick restraining order. The Danishti family, if you actually learned how to research anything, was actually a family that resisted Vlad Tepes. Furthermore, Grant's daughter was killed during the war in the original game, so to remove him and think that for some reason he wouldn't come inland to avenge his daughter is just stupid. Almost as stupid as giving him a thief's knife and making him into a clergyman who works for the bishop. Alright, moving on from Joss Whedon Light, there's not really much to say about Lisa, although there is one comment about something she said, and I'll save that for later. So, jumping straight into the main trio for now, we have Trevor first to bat, and I don't know about you, but he looks a lot shorter to me, mainly because his spine seems to be missing a few vertebrae. Emasculation must have been back on the menu, boys, because I don't know why he becomes so hesitant and a bit of a moron. For the most part, he's fairly competent in battle. Actually, the fight in the Trove shows that he's very resourceful. However, there's a glaring issue that he cannot stop dropping the Morning Star. Yes, the most powerful form that the Vampire Killer whip can take on in any of the games, and the most iconic version of the whip that people know, and for some reason this dude doesn't have a Wiimote attachment that stops him from dropping it. It speaks to a much greater issue, too, about both convenience and power scaling, because my goodness, nothing in this season is balanced. But yeah, it's just really annoying to see him drop this thing more than Thor does his own hammer. And again, on the point of hesitancy, I don't know why he ends up getting coddled a little bit. He doesn't have to be put over someone's shoulder and burped like the baby that is Richter in Nocturne, but my goodness, he's just a deer in the headlights half the time.
Oh no, Trevor, the monsters are attacking. What should we do?
Yes, Belmont, what should we do? I don't know. You're a man of action. We already did this. You accepted who you are and your role in the last season. Fucking do something. And one of the worst jokes happens immediately afterward because it just placates to how stupid he is. He can't figure out how to use a single board to try and block a door. I get why people will laugh at this, but it doesn't work contextually at all. Monsters are currently smashing through the magical stone that protects the Belmont Trove, and this retard can't figure out how to put a board in a door. And when he finally decides to just prop it up against the handle, the door opens anyway and it falls over. I'm willing to bet that no one challenged Warren Ellis on this, and they probably just clapped like a bunch of stupid seals. Unfortunately, Trevor really doesn't do anything else, so let's just move on to Ciiff. She's a bit more mature, as she's revealed to be. She's a lot more supportive and understanding of characters and their plights. This is a good thing, because apparently Trevor needs to be burped, and she calls out Alucard for some of his nonsense. Besides that, some of her action scenes are fine, but let's get into Alucard because this one's weird too. Sometimes Trevor and Alucard get along totally fine, but the moment they get to the Trove, all of a sudden Alucard just becomes this spiteful little shit for brains. It's weird because he knows what vampires want to do, so when he gets apprehensive about looking at all of the skulls of vampires in this glass cabinet, I can't help but wonder, why the fuck are you considering siding with the vampires? It's a bold claim, I understand, but he should not be feeling sympathetic towards vampires knowing that they want to either wipe out the entire world in the case of Dracula, or enslave the world in the case of every other vampire. Besides, he's doing all of this because he knows that's what his mother would want. And again, the quick little rivalry that flares back up between him and Trevor has had no time to develop. When the monsters start smashing in the door to the Belmont Trove, Alucard just calls him out.
I can't do either of those things.
Come on, Belmont. Time to choose. You're either the last son of a warrior dynasty or a lucky drunk. Which is it?
There is no reason for this line. It's stupid. You've already gone through and declared that these people are the ones who are good enough and determined enough to help you. Also, it's really stupid that he does most of the work in all of the combat. Sure, Trevor gets an entire fight against monsters all to himself, but yeah, Alucard also is the only one who basically throws down with Dracula proper. And this really is only because people know Symphony of the Night and no other game. The series has built up to this point that all of these characters are ready to throw down and fight Dracula, and they do fight briefly together, but then everything shifts to Symphony of the Night territory and the others literally get left behind. There's more to this that I want to get to a little later because of the power scaling and plot armor, but I want to stay focused on the characters right now because there's so much to get through. Moving on, we get into the next two major characters that are introduced in the series, those being the Forge Masters Hector and Isaac. And boy, do these two suck. First off, they are both diametrically opposed to their video game counterparts. Let's keep with Hector for now. Hector's origin is very much based on the manga for Curse of Darkness, which is not canon to the games. Elements like his affinity for animals is definitely carried over, however, they changed something to imply that it's not the animals that burnt down the church like in the manga that had his parents in it, but rather Hector himself. Now that's a big problem, which we'll get to in a second, because it creates a contradiction, but we'll move on. In the anime, he lives alone with his animals. However, in the games, he lived with his wife, Rosalie. Anime Hector was recruited because Dracula feels sad. Real Hector's wife, Rosalie, was falsely accused as a witch and was burnt at the stake. And in the most Giga Chad moment ever, he storms the castle and ends up defeating Isaac, Death, and Dracula all in a row. Anime Hector is a Starbucks barista who can't grow facial hair and has a planned date to visit the northern mystical land of Canadia for their maids program. So, due to the radical differences, if we're talking about accuracy to the source material, the anime Hector is completely wrong. But if we ignore all of the inaccuracies, it doesn't matter because the anime Hector still sucks as a character. He's easily swayed, hesitant from the beginning, stupid enough to believe Carmilla, dumbfounded when betrayed, and too retarded to use any of the demons he's created to save himself from capture. If that wasn't enough, this moist piece of toast is dumb enough to attribute the actions of vampires to the purity of animals. How long was your umbilical cord wrapped around your neck? Listen, if I'm playing Subnautica and drive by a Reaper Leviathan interrupting its ritualistic yelling into the void, I know when he starts shaking me like a pit bull does a baby, it's because he's an animal thinking I'm prey. But you know outright when Dracula told you that he wants to wipe out all of humanity. And you know that Carmilla and the other generals want to farm humanity as cattle for eternity. Animals don't think in higher order like this. How can you be this stupid? Never mind, I forget, asking those kinds of questions is like trying to beat a boss in Dark Souls. I'm just smashing my head against a brick wall because this fucking moron can't figure out how to flee after Dracula's castle is taken away.
What was that? The way the castle moved and then vanished. I've been thinking about it all day. I still don't understand.
It's fucking magic, you shriveled sack! Come on! And I hate how he has absolutely no spine whatsoever, which is another problem with the inaccuracies from the game. For those who do not know, because I did a ton of research for this, the Devil Forge Masters are basically on the same power level as Death. Devil Forge Masters have their alchemical abilities because they were trained and have tapped into the power they were granted by Dracula. They use a lesser version of the power Dominus to bring demons back from hell and put them into the bodies of corpses and everything else. This is why Hector, like Isaac, are comparable to Trevor in the game. This is why, as Isaac tricks Hector throughout the course of Curse of Darkness, Hector gets so powerful that he's eventually able to defeat Dracula himself. But we can't have that because Dracula never sought out chaos to make a deal. So he has no spine to stand up for himself, nor, when he becomes disillusioned in Curse of Darkness, does he leave before the main events of that game. It's because he ran away and did not head off Trevor and his allies that Dracula was wiped out as quickly as he was afterwards. Hector became disillusioned with what he was doing because Dracula wanted to wipe everyone out and Hector didn't want this. This is why I said to put a pin in what I mentioned earlier. In the manga, the animals of the night are the ones that burn down the church with his family in it. So because he didn't actually start the fire, it means that Hector never crossed a line that he wouldn't have been able to later. In the anime, however, they heavily imply that he's the one that burnt it, so he already crossed the line into psychopathic territory. So for him to later grow resentful doesn't make sense because he's already done what video game Isaac, and honestly even anime Isaac, would have done at the time. And all of it culminates in him being too stupid to not get stuck in Carmilla's web of lies, which ultimately gets him beaten into the fucking ground. So no matter how you slice it, he's just a punching bag of stupidity. So if you've ever wondered if Tylenol abuse were a character, Hector is it. Moving on, we have the other side of this coin with Isaac. Again, another hefty departure from the game series. First things first, of course, Netflixvania race-swapped him, which has a bunch of implications for later seasons as well. In Curse of Darkness, he was basically a sadomasochist, which was reflected in his garb. He served and revered Dracula for years, actually becoming incredibly jealous of Hector because Hector grew to become Dracula's favorite. Now, of course, that is very much here, but it's more of a parallel. Instead of being a cultist that worshipped Dracula, he's now just a dude who was going to be harvested for his organs and sold as a slave, so Dracula freed him. And because the people behind this series are as woke as an Antifa riot, they decided to turn him into a gay Muslim. Or at least that's what's implied with all the weight of a fully grown Snorlax. I don't know who the Jello dildo was in the writing staff that thought that was a good idea, but I gotta tell ya, the trajectory of a gay man being thrown off a rooftop in Iraq is not a character arc. He was a slave who loved his Crusader master, but because his Crusader master told him that you can't be gay anymore, we have to beat the love out of you. And that's when he turned around and killed this dude by stabbing him in the eyes with his thumb, even though he was already injured and on the ground. And I'm sorry, how did a Crusader lose to a slave that was beaten and bound? It's just another thing that pisses me off as a Christian, sure, but, like, the fact that they tried to turn him into a gay Muslim without fully committing to the bit is also hilarious. The self-flagellation, which is excused as he has to try to cure an impurity from the body, is basically tatbir from the Shia Muslim practice. So yeah, they basically went right up to the line, but they didn't actually fully commit because they were worried some mail-order jihadist was gonna firebomb Netflix. See, that's the funny thing. They don't quite commit here in the same way Nocturne Part 2 does its own shit with the Egyptian pantheon, but I'll get to that later. And just like with Isaac, it doesn't matter. You ignore all the inaccuracies and the woke crap behind him, and he's still a terrible character. When he learns information from dead creatures, he doesn't take that directly to Dracula, he waits for the War Council, and only after a certain point does he use it as any sort of trump card in the arguments. And after he learns about Godbrand wanting to betray Dracula so he can go and do his own thing, he ends up killing Godbrand, who conveniently doesn't kill him in return, which is stupid. And instead of taking this information directly to Dracula saying, hey, your War Council are betraying you, he just keeps it to himself? The only reason Carmilla's allowed to change as many people's minds as she can is because Isaac is inconsistent with his loyalty to Dracula. Put down the whip and go talk to Dracula, you fucking chemo patient. Speaking of Carmilla, let's get into this one. First off, her design is unimpressive. It just looks like somebody figured out what the gradient layer was in Adobe Photoshop. And while it's not important to her design, she is missing her mask, which actually tells me a bit more about the writers. Might as well change the name of this series review to Learning Knowledge About Christians and Vampires with Albeleo, because I've got a lot more for you. In fact, the original Carmilla novel predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by 25 years. Carmilla was written by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu in 1872. She does in fact hail from Styria, and she uses a mask at ballroom parties to pick out her victims. All of her victims being women. In fact, her main target is a woman named Laura, the very same enemy that is fought throughout the franchise. Yeah, the same character with those big cat ears and the blue hair. The cat ears are a reference to Carmilla taking on a werecat form, similar to Dracula when he takes on his different forms attacking victims. And the blue hair could be seen as a reference as well because Carmilla was originally published in an old defunct London magazine called The Dark Blue that ran from 1871 to 1873. The novel is laden with lesbian undertones, which is hilarious because here you have a character that is actually based on something woke as shit, and Netflix fucked it up. Laura is not present and should totally have been in the franchise, but they didn't do it because, again, zero research on the writer's end. It's so stupid that I have to look at the Japanese as the gold standard for research and respect when woke-tards today who claim to be in favor of all of this diversity and woke shit can't even figure out how to work Google. And I wouldn't actually complain about any of this, I would defend it because it's consistent with not only the series, but the original novel. So again, just like all the previous comments before, you can ignore all of the inaccuracies because this character still sucks. In part because she's got plot armor thicker than Godzilla's cheeks. When she first bursts onto the scene, she opens the door, walking in on the War Council as they're all arguing, and her first instinct is to berate everyone because they're all incompetent. I guess I found where the last few vertebrae from Trevor went because she's got more balls than anyone here. She even mocks Dracula to his face because he didn't change Lisa into a vampire. Are you fucking kidding me? She should have been torn to pieces like Jerry Lambert from Predator 2. We know it's a double standard because she gets to say all of this in front of people and nothing happens to her. In fact, she gets to joke it off about Godbrand wanting to sleep with her, which she refuses to do, and when Dracula chuckles, she's allowed to go. But when Godbrand goes in and says, hey, maybe we should keep some people for ourselves to feed on, Dracula outright threatens to bite his heart out. She's allowed to walk around and openly conspires with other generals and Hector, and Isaac is aware of this and he does nothing. She gets punished for nothing. And every so often, because they make her complain about crazy old men. Again, I totally would have defended her if she was just a lesbian vampire who was working for Dracula, but instead they just decided to crank that shit to 11. Speaking of Godbrand, he's basically just here to be the voice for the generals because apparently there wasn't enough room in the budget to have any of the other generals speak any fucking lines. He's a loudmouth jackass of a vampire who just wants to drink people, and I totally understand where he's coming from, but he's also there only to be belligerent and easily manipulated by Carmilla. He serves as a stark contrast so that other characters don't get the abuse and punishment that they probably deserve. And what's even the point of the vampire generals in particular? Outside of diversity points, they don't offer anything else. They're from all over the place: Northern Europe, Central Europe, the Middle East or India, and Japan. But nobody weighs in on battle tactics, supply lines, or anything else of the nature. And I mean this literally, with the exception of Carmilla and Godbrand, none of the other generals have a single line of dialogue in all 8 of these episodes. Hey, Yumi, you gonna say something in Moonspeak? No, of course not, because why would any more than one woman have the ability to speak in Dracula's War Council? And that brings me to the big man himself, and he has been completely neutered. Honestly, you'd be forgiven for believing that the story takes place in Switzerland because Dracula's DNA, if you looked at it under a microscope, would probably have a 96% chance of being related to the IKEA branch. The dude sits in as many chairs as Ving Rhames did in the last 2 Mission Impossible movies. And this is both because not only is he inconsistent, but he might as well be incontinent because he can't get his shit together. Again, mocking Lisa to his face as Carmilla did should have been like pressing Vegeta's Goku button. The War Council room should have looked like Targa Vista, but nope, totally gets away with it because he wants to go and have a little talk with her. He knows that members of his council are openly conspiring against him, and he does nothing. He knows Hector is losing interest in the war. He does nothing. He knows Carmilla is directly responsible for everything that's happening in the War Council, and he does nothing. Get this man a few bricks of cocaine and some Viagra so he can at least do something, please. This is not the Dark Lord. This is not the Prince of Darkness. This is not Dracula. This is suicidal intent clashing with genocidal desire with the impotence of a virgin's first time. Season 2 might as well be one of the greatest advertisements for Lazy Boy because the second he sits down in his chair, his anger goes right out the damn window. This is what happens when you try to humanize evil. And tell me if you've heard this before, but it's basically everything that has to do with all of these other characters shy of the outright forgiveness part, like in Last of Us 2 or Ghosts of Yotai or whatever. And his death after letting go of his anger is truly what sealed the fate of this franchise, I believe. There's no deal with chaos, so that means there's no central evil to allow for anything to continue, which again, ironic because Nocturne Part 2 tries to reverse this decision at a later time. Anyway, with him dead and out of the way, all of the writers got to do whatever the hell story they wanted to and just slap the name Castlevania on it, even though it has no fucking reference whatsoever to Castlevania. And boy, I ain't done. I still have the rest of the writing to go through. There's a lot that does and does not relate to a lot of the characters, so I'm just gonna go through a lot of the other generalizations. First off, statements of importance have almost no reaction to them. Just to give a couple examples, when Trevor finds the Morning Star, no one cares. See, you'd think that Ciiff would know what the Morning Star is, or have heard of its legendary powers, but no, she just kinda like shrugs her shoulders. Or take when Carmilla expresses the importance that the Belmont Trove not be discovered. No one cares. How does a vampire from Styria have more knowledge and understanding of the potential threat that the Belmont Trove poses to the vampires here than the vampires that are already here? It actually speaks to the incompetence of everyone in the War Council for Dracula, because the 3 people who should know about the Belmont Trove don't say anything. But again, just like with the animation, nobody does anything. They just stand there like flat images. Moving on, the comedy is kind of hit and miss. There are some jokes for a little bit of levity, like the one with Alucard and Trevor and Greshit.
He shouldn't die.
Yes, fuck you.
It's a nice enough moment because they just got done winning a battle, and so they're all just kind of blowing off a little steam before they get back on the road for the adventure. That's fine, but a lot of the other jokes don't land, like Ciiff and her talk about how God hates speakers. Again, I'll save that one for a little bit later, and I've already gone over Trevor and the board, but then there's the one where Trevor blasphemes, and I just can't help but feel like you could have done something better with this one. How about instead of saying that God shits in your soup, maybe you start saying something that would probably have him a little more on your side. Even if you didn't commit to the bit, Psalms chapter 23 verses 4 through 6 would have been fantastic in this moment. And perhaps the stupidest scene that was dedicated to humor was the long-winded and totally unnecessary dialogue about whether or not vampires can cross water. All of you have presumably been around for centuries. How do you not know whether or not you can get burned by water? See, why are we doing this? If these people supposedly know Symphony of the Night because it's the most popular game in the franchise, then why does no one know that you need the holy symbol to get through water without hurting yourself? It's a totally unnecessary scene that drags out, and you would think that any of these characters, like, I don't know, Godbrand, who's a Viking and loves boats, who's been splashed with water, I'm sure, should be able to give a definitive answer. It's just one of those stupid scenes that just drags out the pacing, which doesn't help for the plot progression. Supposedly, this big epic war is happening in the background, but you could have fucking fooled me. There's more proof of war happening in Skyrim than what's going on in this series. An episode or two in, whoa, we're hardly losing. Several episodes later, oh, we're losing. Where? The only offensive we have seen you lose is the attack on Greshet last season, and that was under special circumstances. There hasn't been any sort of mention with any other location like Jova, Aljaba, Ondel, Doina, Yomi, any of these towns. See, and I can't help but think that all of this world building was definitely an afterthought because not only does the war not get any real attention, but the whole series forgets to be scary. It's an action horror. Hell, 2 of those action scenes aren't even in the present. One is a dream by Godbrand, and the other one is Dracula reliving a memory. So with the exception of the generals running out to feed on one village, which again shows that they're winning and not losing, you have the monsters fighting the trio twice, and both of those parties get wiped out. So that means that out of the first 6 episodes, there's only 2 real action scenes. And so much of the plot rides on convenience that it's hard to take any of it seriously anyway. Somehow Carmilla knows that Dracula's dead. With what mirror? The one from earlier? Where'd she put it? Unless it's up her snatch, it was back in the castle, which teleported away. Or how about Ciiff bringing Dracula's castle to her? That wasn't a perfect example of how rushed this production was. 6 episodes into an 8-episode season, and they just teleport the castle to them. Travel time, what's that supposed to be? Why would we ever want an immersive adventure for all of the fans and new fans to enjoy? Hell no, let's pull off the latter half of Game of Thrones and have everyone just teleport everywhere. And at the same time, it's super ironic that Trevor keeps dropping the Morning Star. You know why he has to keep dropping it? It's real simple. Yeah, it's because every time he hits anything that isn't Dracula, it basically dies. Or how about when Godbrand was getting taken down by Isaac? Man, how convenient that this dude who doesn't have the power of Dracula in him is somehow able to overpower a vampire who's at least hundreds of years old.
Oh, but he was losing blood. He was growing weaker.
Isaac is literally sitting on top of him with his guard down. Instantly, wham, right up through the chest, pull out the heart, done. Instead, he goes to tickle his back. Or how about Carmilla's forces managing to attach underwater the pull chains to collapse the bridge? Yeah, try and square that one the fuck away with the whole, oh, we can't cross running water. And before some moron with half a brain cell tries to tell me, oh, they was already there, no, ballistas weren't even there, let alone attached. But let's keep going with this and tackle the issue of power scaling. The writers probably spent a day or two trying to figure out what that tastes like because all of these characters are so radically inconsistent with their own power levels that it makes no sense. Trevor being just a regular dude in this and not the video game is fine. I'm okay with that. But what I don't like is when something like, I don't know, the Minotaur that just smashed through the magical stone that blocked the trove somehow doesn't kill him. It's just like when the Cyclops grabbed him and instead of popping him like a pimple, it throws him away like that stupid Terminator Salvation crap. Or how about how Dracula could have and should have very easily dispatched Trevor and Ciiff. Again, they are regular people, but you have Dracula himself boxing with people and somehow they're still standing. Dracula catches Alucard's sword with 3 fingers like they were redoing the scene from Dragon Ball Z with Goku blocking Trunks' sword. No problem whatsoever, shoves him aside, smacks him down. Then he charges against Trevor, and instead of ripping Trevor in half, he just smashes him against the wall and then slaps him down. And then Ciiff tries to step up and do something, and that doesn't work when she gets smacked back into the kitchen. But again, none of these characters die when they very clearly are outclassed, and the only reason the fight is allowed to continue is because they just take Dracula, who's only toying with these people instead of going full berserk mode as he should be, and they live. This entire hallway should be messier than a linebacker smashing through an Olive Garden, but no, everything's super clean, totally fine, because these characters all have plot armor. And I get it. They're supposed to be the heroes, so of course they're gonna live, I understand. But for the love of God, please, make me feel as if these characters are genuinely about to die. And there's one last thing that I want to get into, which is, again, the anti-Christian themes, because somehow this series managed to one-up itself. Remember that thing I told you about with Lisa? Well, she ends up saying that the devil isn't real, but Dracula is. Yeah, that doesn't square away with the rest of the series. It doesn't work contextually, thematically, or mechanically for the series. Demons are real, and you're married to a vampire. That's just as retarded as believing that nothing but an idea is currently burning down half of Portland. Whether you believe it or not in reality is up to you, but in this series, it definitively exists, both God and the devil, period. End of discussion. That's why other claims, like when Alucard says that the Tower of Babel isn't real, it just makes me roll my eyes. Or take that retarded moment where they have the undead bishop bless the river. The writers, and thus the show, literally cannot make up their minds in their own season. The bishop's soul is not in his body. He literally cannot bless the river. Also, he didn't actually say any prayer. What he said in Latin is In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. All that translates to is in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That's it. He says that twice, doesn't even fully commit to it, and somehow that counts as a blessing. So that's completely wrong, of course. Or how I mentioned earlier that Ciiff makes a joke about God hating speakers because they, quote, speak the truth. Again, I have to ask the question, if the speakers are all about transferring knowledge, then why wouldn't they continue the oral traditions of ancient Christianity? Obviously, they're filthy pagans, but they should still be trying to transfer the knowledge and all of the lessons, but instead they take a particular hatred against Christianity, which makes no sense. Which is really stupid because then she talks about how, oh, well, we've experienced the corruption of the church firsthand. What corruption? You mean the one bishop and a few of his henchmen? See, this is what I'm talking about with the blanket hatred of the church. The first season actually counters this point by Ciiff. You're not gonna sneak this one past me. Trevor calls for a priest or a deacon to bless the water in the fight in Greshit. Remember this scene?
Have some people. Go to the nearest well, start drawing water. You know what to do with water, yes? For the aspersion? Go! Ciiff?
Yes.
You're right fucking there! Stop treating the audience like we're too stupid to catch these details. You fucking idiots wrote this so that she was right there. She knows there are good people in the church. It's stupid and I'm sick of it. The people in the church are not all evil in the same way not all cops are evil. Just because you hyper-focus on a couple select instances does not automatically mean that the entire institution should be thrown out. Again, they missed an opportunity to use scripture in a positive way. Right before they storm the castle, the trio basically look like they've been defeated. Like, I enjoy the silence where they're all just taking in the moment like, hey, we're about to attack Castlevania itself and fight Dracula, and we're gonna find out whether or not we win or lose. The silence is fine here, so I don't disagree with anybody who enjoys it as it is. Again, if there was more time to actually have camaraderie develop between these characters, they probably could have sat down and used this moment to use scripture as a way to uplift themselves. As they ascend towards the castle from the bottom of the trove, maybe Ciiff could have started Ephesians 6, verse 10. Finally, draw strength from the Lord and from his mighty power. And then Trevor would jump in, put on the armor of God so that you may be able to stand firm against the tactics of the devil. Then Alucard could chime in with, for our struggle is not with flesh and blood, but with the principalities, with the powers, with the world rulers of this present darkness, with the evil spirits in the heavens. And then lastly, the three of them could say in unison as the music begins to swell, therefore, put on the armor of God, that you may be able to resist on the evil day and having done everything to hold your ground. So while I'm continuing to dig a mass grave for the entirety of the Castlevania franchise at this point, I'm just going to keep going with all of this Christian knowledge. On the point of evil in the church, it's literally not the church or its teachings. It is the individuals who choose to act on ill intent who infiltrate the church. Again, with that previous scene, this series itself proves that not all of the clergy are evil. Evil will find its way into every institution it can because evil doesn't have a face. Even the Last Supper, which was the very first Mass ever, had an evil individual there. Judas. And ironically, he Jewed us when he betrayed Christ for some silver. So whether in the context of this series, or even in your own life, instead of blaming God and the church for any of your problems, how about you look inward and see that the real evil is actually the choices that we make selfishly. And it's that selfishness which, ironically, the series actually kind of answers something for a lot of people. Trying to end on a little bit more of a positive note, Ciiff actually answers the question between magic and blessings. For anybody who's ever been confused about whether or not, like, blessings in a church or anything are magic, well, technically yes, if that's how you want to view it, but there's a very distinct difference.
I have to be able to see it to put my intent on it.
Your intent?
That's all magic is, Alucard. Changing things in accordance with my intent.
Super simple. Magic is a demand. Blessings are requests. Yeah, that's just one of those little things that they actually got right. So yeah, Season 2 is kind of a shitstorm with the exception of a few kernels of corn. It's terribly paced, with almost half, if not 2/3 of the season dedicated to the villains instead of the actual heroes. It's proof positive that everything after this was never intended to be Castlevania, except in name only. The animation was very lacking, the art style itself is just competent enough. Almost all of the characters are morons, the world building is terrible, and it's just a terrible experience overall. But buckle up, there's 2 more seasons before I get to Nocturne Part Deuce. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, then please like, share, and subscribe to help build this kingdom. Head over to my secondary channel, Balmorian Herald, for news and political commentary. Head to my tertiary channel, Balmorian Galaxy, for Battletech and MechWarrior. And if you feel so inclined, then please donate to me on Subscribestar to help me produce more content. I thank you all for watching again, and I will see you in the next video.